welcome to the 9642 podcast. This is your host, Mr. NumberNine.
And this is The Fool.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our podcast. And touch wood, we've been keeping a really good schedule, and we're going to be on a roll before I go away on holiday for a good 2 to 3 weeks coming up, going back to Bangladesh. But we'll still be pumping out some content in that time, and then we'll be recording new content again when I'm back after Easter.
This podcast that we're recording right here will probably be out while you're away.
Yeah, fair enough. So I'll hope everybody had a great Easter. This is probably when you will be hearing it. It'll also give you some much needed time off from editing and refreshing and recharging the batteries.
Yeah. Be good. But I mean, it's still going to take a bit of editing to get through, but we'll get there and we'll be okay. But we'll get them done, and then we can just schedule them out.
Super Rugby Aotearoa, and it kind of revitalized, I think, a love for rugby in the country, because it was at some point the only sport we could watch. Yeah. And we really loved watching our players go out there. There was not getting any money, and there's been there's some problems coming for New Zealand and to a certain degree Australian rugby.
Yeah.
With the current state of SANZAR.
Yeah. So New Zealand Rugby lost money in 2020, and I think they were only going to break even this last 12 months, if that. So there was definitely financial drivers there for changing something, and they knew that what was happening wasn't going to be sustainable going forward. That's been the New Zealand Rugby Union's point all along, is that whatever happens, what's currently happening will not mean...
We are not going back to a pre-COVID normal when it comes to rugby, 100%. Now, before COVID, I think I'm sure most of our listeners know this, but those from countries where rugby is not a major sport, I think it's important to understand that World Rugby was going through some schisms and trying to figure out what they wanted to do with the sport. In the Southern Hemisphere, the national games and to a certain degree, the franchise system, which was heavily linked to the national game because it was a transnational competition, were more popular and were like the financial backbone of the game, whereas the traditional clubs in England, France, and the other Six Nation countries are the backbone of the financial structure up in the Northern Hemisphere. The proposal was that we would have a concurrent sixth and rugby championship going on at the same time, and then the winners of the two divisions two conferences effectively would play each other in a final, and we would have relegation, promotion. The Southern Hemisphere loved it. Absolutely loved it. They thought it was a great idea. More money for the game, spreads it out. We get to introduce the game to more markets and put them into our quote unquote region of influence, things like this. And it would definitely set up a system that would make rugby grow and more sustainable in the long term. At least, and I say this as a very biased Southern Hemisphere perspective. We can only see the benefits. I'm sure Northern Hemisphere rugby fans will have a completely different benefit. And I'll be honest, basically from my perspective, their excuses all sound like we don't give a crap about rugby played anywhere else in the world. We just care about our local rugby club. And we might care about our home nation, England, Ireland, Wales, during the Six Nations and every 4 years during the Rugby World Cup. But the national thing doesn't bother us. We don't care if they play rugby in Georgia or Lebanon or Russia or the United States. Growing those markets, making money, and the clubs. This is the weird thing for me because the clubs in the Northern Hemisphere seem to agree with their fans, where I think like a sport like Rugby League, which is always desperate. Like, I think this is a proof that, like, rugby union up north is less professional than rugby league, because rugby league is always looking to expand into markets where there's heaps of eyeballs, get the viewing numbers, and, get the
Yeah.
audience to their sport and grow the game as much as they can.
Yeah.
Um, like, we can make fun of the Rugby League World Cup all we want about players representing but the best league players are in the Rugby League World Cup.
Yeah.
It's the Rugby League World Cup is a festival of rugby league. Like, everybody enjoys watching the Rugby League World Cup. There's so-called gimme games don't really exist because the way league works, and because good players from who play their game, who play domestically in England, Australia, New Zealand, are allowed to represent their second country to make it more even.
Yeah.
Because rugby league thinks about the product and like entertaining the fans.
Exactly. And I mean, that was
So
shown at the last actual Rugby League World Cup here in New Zealand,
yeah,
when there was, some would call it a mass defection of previously New Zealand Kiwi players who had played for New Zealand, for the Kiwis, and they went to Tonga because they could. And they were like, well, actually, we're going to go represent Tonga in the World Cup because we want to. They could definitely get game time, and they weren't necessarily fringe players, but there was competition for those spots. And B, they could, and it was national pride. They're like, we're Tongan first and New Zealand second.
I also want to. The equivalent of Tom Brady in rugby league went to Tonga.
Yeah.
New Zealand, anyway.
Yeah, exactly. That was, yeah, Tamalolo going to Tonga was a big thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there was more than just him. There was about 4 or 5, I want to say, players,
Yeah,
and a couple of Australians as well. Like people who had previously played for the Kangaroos also went and played for Tonga.
Yeah, and it doesn't hurt their future chances for the Kiwis or the Kangaroos for that matter, which is what's great about the system. Um, it has its detractors, but every sport has a different international tradition. You can't, and rugby leagues is that we want the best things at the World Cup. We want players to grow the international game. We want players to come out and have the opportunity to represent more than one country, because we want them to grow, want to do both, and that'll keep them from wanting to play, rugby, and things like that. So that's the way rugby league works. I mean, the idea that having American viewers, like I don't know, the Heineken Cup in England, the Heineken Cup and the English Premiership could easily become like the equivalent of the Premier League in that the Premier League in football, where it's the most most watched league, the most money. They could do the English rugby clubs should be actively trying to do that for rugby and rugby fans in America, and create this new market. Sure, it's not going to be as valuable or as rich as associate, and I'm going to use this term for the rest of the podcast just to differentiate between the different codes. Soccer, to different compared to soccer, it's not going to be as rich, but rugby has the possibility of becoming like maybe the third or fourth most popular sport internationally, after sports like basketball.
Yeah.
And like for team sports, that is.
Yeah.
Basketball and cricket, and cricket is stupidly mismanaged in a way that rugby union is not.
Yeah.
Like, and we don't need to go into a rant about cricket. Like, cricket is way underperforming what it should do in the international level in terms of money. And we know that those, like, when the only thing that's keeping, and World Rugby has been so good, so competently, carefully growing the game around the world using both 7s and 15s. It was a bit disappointing that the Northern Hemisphere fans didn't were like not willing to take the next step and be more ambitious and grow the game further. Like, I don't have a dog in the fight. Realistically, I'm not that big a rugby union fan.
Yeah.
But I, to a large degree, envy what World Rugby has. As a cricket fan, I wish cricket was as well organized as World Rugby is.
Yeah. But yeah, that whole inter-hemisphere championship thing, whatever, they did have a name for it, I've forgotten. Yeah, it was about the closest they've become the IRB has come to being
You
about
could,
as incompetent as the ICC. But
yeah.
in my
And to be fair,
understanding,
the IRB or World Rugby were not the ones who were incompetent. They put forward, I
no,
thought, a really good proposal, a good commercial idea. It was basically shot down by the home nations
yeah,
in the
and
Northern Hemisphere.
and in that it was my understanding it was mostly England that shot it down. Like the IRB had consulted and had gone through and had thought it through, and
Yeah.
it was pretty close to going through. The only thing, as I understood it, that stopped it really was that it had that England didn't want to have even the possibility of relegation out of the Six Nations. They just they were like the promotion relegation was their sticking point.
Yeah,
With
I understood that as to be
yeah,
their sticking point too. But if you had expanded the Six Nation, like the
yeah,
top division, into a seven-team division, and did the same in the Southern Hemisphere,
yeah.
like when is England going to be relegated? When
That
are
was
they
my
ever
point as
going
well.
to be
That was
When are they ever going to be not just worse than Italy, but worse than a seventh team that's come into
like
this
Georgia.
competition?
Yeah,
Sure. The seventh team, if it's South Africa, don't get me wrong. One of you guys are getting relegated, probably Italy.
yeah,
And like it's definitely a thing for a worry for countries like Italy, Scotland, maybe to an extent Wales and Ireland if they ever get, they're in a high point now in their rugby, but you can always go through a bad generation.
yeah,
But, we have relegation promotion in the Nations League in soccer. England are not afraid of relegation. I'm guessing these public school boys that are part of the English rugby scene are just born cowards.
yeah,
And like the common man is always got courage.
yeah. That's one way definitely looking at it. Um, yeah, it was just England being England more than anything, or England Rugby Union being that, and it's just yeah, it was just silliness. It's like there was no need for
Eh,
it. As you said, what likelihood of it ever was it going to happen? Like zero.
Yeah. And if it
So
did happen, good, you deserve it. I'm
yeah,
sorry. Like that's one of the things that annoys the hell out of me about cricket. Why the hell are you a test match country? Because what, 80, 90, 100 years ago, a bunch of old people in England decided, okay, this might be a nice place to have a holiday. We'll we'll go play a few cricket games and earn some money to make up for it. Like effectively, the early test tours were that working
yeah,
holidays, right? They go
yeah, yeah.
to like New Zealand. Like I say this as a New Zealand cricket fan, did not deserve to be a test nation 27 years when it couldn't win any. Like we still have the record for the lowest ever test match total. Like
Yes.
the first group of test matches that New Zealand were not a test match standard country
No.
like for at least the first decade. Sure, it took us a bit longer because of World War II and everything to finally get our get our first win. And obviously I know all that, but at the end of the day, them's the cookies, right? Like
Yeah.
you're not good enough. You're not good enough. Like in the Olympics, we don't go, oh yeah. Scotland gets an automatic place in the 100-meter sprint or like the mile or the marathon because Roger Bannister like in the 40s. What? How dumb would that be? Like it's incredibly stupid way to run a sport.
It is. It really is.
Like nobody thinks that's how it should be run. Like why do people in it's the private school mentality. This is my political bias coming in right now, but yeah, it's the old school private school boys mentality to
Yeah.
basically cowardice. I'm just gonna call it that.
It's probably the
Uh,
best word for it. I
but as it was, like this plan was supposed to sustain rugby for a long time, and heck, if that had gone through, surely maybe it would not have been able to take part in during COVID times. But the fact that we had this all available and the requisite TV rights and everything by 2023, which I think is what the proposed start date for it was, it
yeah.
would have been all go. Like New Zealand rugby would have been in a position where, like, yeah, we can sustain a few losses because the good times are coming.
Yeah.
We're getting this, and World Rugby is not just reliant on World Cups. We have this annual, every year national competition.
Yeah, exactly. And it would have been helpful too because the other sticking point, which wasn't really a sticking point, but this is where the clubs really stuck in. They had their other things, but was the establishment of the international windows. So there would be established international windows in June-ish, July-ish, and other one in October, November-ish, or maybe a bit later, so that the cross countries or the cross hemisphere stuff could happen, um, which would have been great as well, because then they would have had
Yeah.
actual, you know, dedicated windows, which has always been a problem, is trying to sort out
Yeah.
things, and clubs, unlike soccer, as you say, which does have dedicated international weekends, this international things,
Yep. As much
people,
as we have a love-hate relationship with those weekends, they
yeah,
exist.
they exist, and they mean that there isn't tension between club and country. Like there's a weekend, this is the you
But
go play
there's
for your
less
country.
tension, let's
Less
be
tension.
fair.
Okay, there's still tension, still heaps of tension, but less tension. Whilst like there was a problem with Argentina playing in the Southern Hemisphere competitions because all the good players play in Europe, and the European clubs wouldn't let them free to come play in the middle,
Yeah.
at different times. Like it didn't really. There was
And it's
issues that way,
similar
and
for
this,
South
yeah,
Africa now that
yeah,
their good players are in. It's one of these interesting things, and we will get into this because it's got some now consequences. So basically, after COVID, New Zealand went and formed Super Rugby Aotearoa. South Africa threw a hissy fit. Would that be fair?
No, South Africa had thrown the hissy fit first,
For
sort
a
of.
while, but like for a
Yeah,
while they've been going bluffing and saying we're gonna leave, we're gonna leave, we're gonna leave, and basically finally New Zealand Rugby after COVID went, we're fucked either way,
yeah.
and they called their bluff, and South Africa went, how dare you call my bluff? And like we're throwing a hissy fit, and like sure, there's a contract to be running the rugby championship till 2025.
Hmm.
Um, the Australians went, okay, this is not a bad idea. We definitely do want to join. I will point out that the income generated by Super Rugby from South Africa outweighs every other country combined. So losing South Africa is a huge thing. So it's
Yeah,
this idea, it would be like for cricket fans who listen to this podcast and have no context, it's like literally if a country like Australia kept going, oh, leave then India, don't play cricket with us, India, don't, and then India went, okay, we won't, and then they're like, no, what have we done?
yeah. Because
Except, less like, no, what have we done? More of a, yeah, I know you're gonna leave. It's fine. We have to figure it out. It's not gonna work now.
yeah,
The divorce has happened
it has
at this
happened.
point.
It was always a bit of a rocky thing because South Africa, they provided most of the funds, but they
Yeah,
were getting balanced out by the All Blacks and the Wallabies' legacy and their prestige. So it was
yeah,
very much a you keep giving you keep staying in the Super Rugby stuff so that New Zealand and Australia can have the money from the South African and European audiences, and we'll keep you in the Rugby Championship, so you keep playing New Zealand and Australia, so you have the prestige, feel confident because you get to play
uh,
us, and
yeah,
it was the balance. And then COVID and everything sort of just has thrown that
yeah.
all into a bit of a
It
big thing. I
has.
mean, there was hissy fits of sorts starting before that because they had been expanding the Super Rugby and then they contracted down to 15 teams, which caused Australian rugby with the Western Force being dropped out, having a massive hissy fit about it, which was very fair for their hissy fits.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, and then also some of the South
Uh,
African teams
let's
leaving,
be honest.
going. So
Nobody in Melbourne gives a shit about the rebels.
yeah,
People in Perth love going to the Force. Like the
yeah,
Force are the one of the best, hottest tickets in town in Perth, and people love going there.
yeah,
Versus literally like nobody. There could be fewer shits given about a team like the Victoria Rebels but
yeah,
I haven't
exactly.
seen one.
Yeah,
Look,
no,
the
that was
Storm win shit. This is why people in Melbourne care about the Storm. The,
yeah,
the Rebels don't. Like
no,
that's just blunt.
yeah, yeah. That is exactly it. Like it was a vaguely weird decision not to include
Yeah.
the Force. Well, yeah, to include the rebels but not include the force.
I know why they included the rebels. Melbourne is Australia's second largest city,
Oh
and
yeah,
if rugby's not viable in Melbourne, like, you're not getting the most out of the Australian economy. I mean, all of those reasons I understand. In the end of the day, it was still a dumb decision.
yeah, exactly. It's still like, well,
In the break of all this, Zealand Rugby seemed to get this great angel investor.
which caused Australian rugby with the Western Force being dropped out, having a Western Force having a massive hissy fit about it, which was very fair for their hissy fits.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then also some of the South
Uh,
African teams
let's
leaving,
be honest,
going. So
nobody in
yeah,
Melbourne gives a shit about the rebels.
yeah,
People in Perth love going to the Force. Like, the
yeah,
Force are one of the best, hottest tickets in town in Perth, and people love going there.
yeah,
Versus literally, like, nobody. There could be fewer shits given about a team like the Victoria Rebels, but
yeah,
I haven't
exactly.
seen one.
Yeah,
Look,
no,
the
that was
Storm win shit. This is why people in Melbourne care about the Storm. The,
yeah,
the Rebels don't. Like,
no,
that's just blunt.
yeah, yeah. That is exactly it. Like it was a vaguely weird decision not to include
Yeah.
the Force. Well, yeah, to include the rebels but not include the Force
I
because
know why they included the Rebels. Melbourne is Australia's second largest city,
oh
and
yeah,
if rugby's not viable in Melbourne, like, you're not getting the most out of the Australian economy. I mean, all of those reasons I understand. In the end of the day, it was still a dumb decision.
yeah, yeah, exactly. It's still like, well,
In the break of all this, Zealand Rugby seemed to get this great angel investor. Fool.
but yeah, the latest deal. I think when we were talking about it, we looked at the New Zealand Players Rugby Players Association's
Proposal,
deal,
and
and we're like,
we really liked it.
yeah, we're like, that's a great deal. Like this is something that grows the game, that provides future. Um, and yeah, as
And
you say, it,
actively is a good way to keep players playing in New Zealand because they have an actual stake, like a
yeah,
financial stake, a real financial stake to staying here and, like, secure their future and things like this. And, like, it's definitely and still means that, like, in terms of competing for talent, like, New Zealand rugby players can actually think about, like, would we can strongly compete with NRL money when
yeah,
you're like a young high school athlete in Auckland, Wellington, Gisborne, or Canterbury, whether you decide to go play for your local league club or your local union club. You're an athlete. You've kind of decided to try and pursue this athletic path at 12, 13, and
yeah,
you're kind of good at both codes because, you're an big athletic 12, 13-year old who's, and getting the good side of puberty.
yeah,
There was almost really no reason to pick rugby other than nationalistic pride, because league paid you better from a younger age and had way less restrictions on what you could do, and you could always just come back and play union if you really wanted to
yeah.
later on.
I mean, some of those less restrictions have turned up in the papers more often with league and the NRL
Yeah.
over the last few years. So that's, I mean, New Zealand Rugby Union may see that as a positive that they've been pretty tight on those things because it's fairly rare to get a union player splashed across the front pages because of some indiscretion or stupidity they've done.
I was more meaning, like, you're not expected to go and play for your school and things like that.
Yeah,
You could just go play for your club, and it's not a problem, and you can be earning professional money and things like that. Whereas
yeah,
the
yeah,
rugby union is very strong. Go do your high school stuff, do this because it needs to feed to our system.
yeah. Well, yeah, it sort of all flows the same thing in that the union is very structured, and this is what you
Yeah,
do, and you go there and go there. But it's also very, this is, if you're not doing that, and if you're not following this, and you're not being this person over here that we need you to be, then you are cut free. Whilst in union, yeah, it's more freer, you can do what you want, but it also leads to that,
I mean
the
in
flip
league.
side of it. On league, sorry, in league you can, so that free you can do what you want, but it leads to this the issues that they have, which is having a lot more indiscretions happening.
I mean, let's be fair on that. With the indiscretions, it mostly happens in Sydney and Melbourne,
Yeah,
sometimes Brisbane. So it's a lot of these players getting played at a young age, but also realistically, th there's less things in New Zealand to get you in trouble for.
yeah. I mean, there is a bit of
Like
that as well.
that, like no disrespect to my countrymen, like there's less people in New Zealand than all of Sydney, just as a
Yeah,
comparison. Secondly, the press and the police and they don't take an active effort to try and suppress a lot of the worst behavior of New Zealand rugby players because we hear about like the impression foreign fans have about New Zealand rugby players and what the press goes over there. We almost sometimes hear nothing about it over here. Like it's
yeah.
almost censored by our papers. Like in a like it's like one of the big grand conspiracies in New Zealand. Like so, whereas like the same that would never happen in Australia. Like if a rugby player is big enough in Australia, like also like the people who tend to get splashed on these papers are, they're people from, working class backgrounds, whatever
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
ethnicity they might be, first time they have access to a lot of money and like attention, not sure what to do about it. Whereas most rugby union players in Australia are rich, from
Yeah,
rich families going to private school.
yeah.
Like
I know.
they're
There is
they're not
lots of
in that
factors
same
involved.
situation in that so that's it's less about the structures in league as more of a the really the
Well,
socioeconomic conditions of both
yeah.
countries.
Oh no, there's definitely lots of factors in. Just one of the things I feel at whether and it's a contributing factor. It's not the overriding factor. Is just to me, union will provide better support structures around younger players as they come through, whilst league in some stages can get a bit lost in the support structures.
Yeah,
And a bit of that is that union tries to keep young people in their area. So if they were going to school in Auckland and growing up in Auckland, they try and keep them there until they're old enough. Before then, they start moving to Christchurch or something. And as you say, that even makes it even less likely. Because you're going to from the one city where perhaps there is enough vice to get into real trouble to, Dunedin or where the students already or the locals are posing as students to um, cause more
yeah,
trouble than whatever the rugby players are going to do. Whilst in
yeah,
Australia, that's if you, especially with league, you're moving to one of the many Sydney clubs,
yeah,
and you're going to have problems in Sydney because there's lots of them there. It's more likely. But I also
yeah.
feel that the support structures don't exist in the same way. So there's sort of just
Or
oh
doesn't
you
it really exist for people coming in from another country a lot of times, or
mm,
like from an outside? Like if you're a pet, like for example, you're joining the Penrith Panthers on a big contract, unless you were someone playing in one of Penrith's feeder clubs down the systems in the local competition, where they would look after you. If you're coming in from, oh, I was a country boy, and I played really well in district league and like I got spotted and scouted late or from
yeah
New Zealand in the same situation sort of thing, or Papua New Guinea or any other any other place that's not the rigid structure. There is less of a thing to help you because by the time you might get to Penrith, they're like, you're a 21-year-old. Is it really appropriate for us to treat you like a teenager? Like, they're also in that position where
yeah
is it appropriate for us to make all these rules that treat you like school children, where primary school children, and
but Union does
where
that. That's what I
yeah,
mean. Is that if you go to the Crusaders or if you go to the Blues or wherever you're going, they
yeah,
do have those support structures and stuff in place. Um, and not to pick on your analogy, on your example, but Penrith's probably the worst one because I'm pretty sure they actually have those structures as well. I know the Warriors do. Um,
yeah,
for better or worse,
yeah.
the
Penrith, I
Warriors
think
management.
specifically do have those structures in place.
Yeah,
Warriors do as well,
yeah,
but not a lot of Sydney clubs because they might not have to.
no, it's the inner city Sydney ones that seem to be innerish city ones that seem to be the worst for it, and it tends to be just as I say people get given a lot of money and sort of let loose,
Yeah,
and what's going to happen? You know?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's similar. It happens all over the world in professional sport, like
Yeah,
in different contexts. Um, Now, with this like money coming in from Silver Lake, basically everybody was told it was a good, like the way the media always takes the player, like the rugby union side every time. Every time there's any argument between the rugby union and somebody else, and whatever that person might be, like you can argue all you want about. You can insult the prime minister, you can insult the leader of the opposition, you can say terrible things about the monarch nowadays. You cannot besmirch the reputation of New Zealand rugby in New
Oh no.
Zealand.
No, no,
Like,
no.
and I'm not being sarcastic here. Like, the media will come down on you hard. The old school media. I don't know what it's like on social media because I don't live on Twitter anymore and I don't do other socials, and especially do not tweet about rugby or look for tweets about rugby.
Yeah.
But I can't help but wonder if a lot of people who type in the comment section of Stuff and other newspapers are not paid by the New Zealand Rugby Union or by Stuff themselves to
Yeah.
promote the position of the New Zealand Rugby Union just because they want that gains traction. And like, it's one of those things because I don't think any of the things the players were saying were unreasonable. But I think some
No.
of the objections to it were incredibly unreasonable. Things like, why are the players saying stuff? I mean, because it's their career and livelihood. Of course they're
Yeah.
going to say stuff. What the
Yeah.
hell is wrong with you? Like,
Yeah.
oh,
How
they're
dare
just
they have an
employees.
opinion?
No, they're not. We've been through this. You're an entertainment industry. They're the talent. They're
Yeah.
the talent.
Yeah. What do
No
you think
gold
is?
mine makes gold without gold. You
Yeah.
know?
Exactly. What do you think?
You're a talent mine. They're the talent.
Yeah. What do they think they were selling? You know, what is being brought?
Look, you
Like
can
it's
have the best CEOs, the best administrators, the best coaches. None of us pay money to watch them do their job.
yeah.
Like, absolutely
Exactly.
none of us.
No.
Sure, those guys help to make the people who we watch do a job better, and they should be. But at the end of the day, that is what we pay for. It is their talent that is the commodity you are selling.
Yeah.
So they're never just employees in any entertainment industry. The people who are putting themselves out there to be viewed by the public, especially in this day and age where they're where what they do is so publicly scrutinized by everybody, they they're the ones putting their commodity, they're the ones putting themselves out there for you to earn money.
Yeah. But as I say,
So,
we covered this in a lot more
yeah.
detail in the previous podcast.
If you disagree, that's fine. You're just
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
all I have to say about that.
But the new deal definitely, I think, brings that balance back in. So I think you had a good point when we were talking about it earlier, where uh, the New Zealand Rugby Union, the first negotiation round, were like, "Oh, money, yay!" And the Players Union was like, or Players Association was like, "No, we need to play a little bit of hardball here," and actually negotiated with Silver Lake, and Silver Lake was like, actual negotiations. We respect you, and there was actually a good deal signed all round.
I think
Things.
I did not think there was any bad faith actions from
No.
Silver Lake, by the way. And if
Oh no.
I haven't re-listened to the podcast I said recently, but I did say that they're behaving like a commercial entity,
Yes.
and they're behaving the way a normal commercial entity. They're not lying. They're not misrepresenting the facts. They're going, this is the deal.
Yeah.
Because very publicly, people from the rugby union went on and on about how this is not a cash cow deal, but nobody from Silver Lake said those words.
No.
You have to. So there's no disrespect from me for Silver Lake, and they are an experienced entity in dealing with sport. Investing in sport and helping sports teams maximize their income and things
Yeah.
like that. Like they did this with Manchester City.
Yeah, exactly. They've got $90 billion of assets.
Yeah,
And
that's not
sports-related portfolio. So yeah.
Yeah, so these are people who know what they're doing, and they're willing to be flexible and figure out a deal that'll work with the people. Like clearly, they believe the commercial rights and the image rights for the involved in New Zealand rugby are worth something, and and it can be, and a lot more income can be generated than it is now, because otherwise you're not investing into it. It's a chance to invest a little and grow something really big and then reap the rewards from it. That's usually what Silver Lake does.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying the previous model would not have trickled down some money to the New Zealand Rugby Union and things like this. And by the way, the players were also never saying we're going to lose our autonomy and all these, like individual players may have been saying this, which is very different to Rob Nichol, the head of the New Zealand Rugby Players Association.
Yeah.
And they're like, obviously we have concerns. Is different to going, oh, we're going to lose it. Like they're saying we have, and a lot of players were saying, yes, if we do this, we lose a lot of our control and things like this in the future. And that led to another negotiation before the current deal got signed, which which basically investment firms were saying this is so heavily weighted in favor of the sporting body versus Silver Lake. It's one of the most favorable deals we've ever seen. And I'm like, yes, by your standards. This is from an investment company standards. Like usually, if you and I had a startup, okay, if Mark Zuckerberg came in and said, hey, $1 billion, what do you want? We would make a very favorable deal to him because we're expecting $1 billion.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
but that's if we had but New Zealand Rugby is not a startup.
No, they're not.
And it's not. And
whilst it had a couple of bad years, they, as you say, they were the owners of the gold mine. They have the gold and the gold mine and all the stuff they needed to mine said gold and turn it into something. So it wasn't as though they.
And the value of gold hadn't changed yet. It's just that everything's value had changed.
Yeah. And it was just a bit uncertain about how long that value would change for.
Yeah.
And
yes.
There was, and I think the new model sort of allows for this better. It was always a case of they should be making the deal such that it was providing the growth opportunities. How is this going to make sure that the game's going to grow, not just survive but grow? And I think whilst the first model didn't necessarily stop that happening, as you say, there's no one saying it wasn't going to happen. It was just there were some concerns and some questions around, well, exactly how is this happening? It's not clear. And it appears in the newer deal, they've hammered that out a bit. They've shown the separation between the commercial interests and how that's been addressed and who's got says into that. So New Zealand Players Association gets say into it. New Zealand Rugby Union has say into that. So the commercial side's all nicely signed up, and that's kept separate from the rugby bit and the sporting bit and the actual strategic direction of the All Blacks as a entity, which I think is good in how it's done.
Yeah.
And they've also incorporated the Players Association's ideal of some, the 5%-ish in the end stake that New Zealanders can buy into it. So later in the year, they're floating, was it between 60 and 100 million that New Zealanders can buy into, and that is backed by Silver Lake. So what happens if it doesn't sell, then Silver Lake will absorb that cost as such, or they'll sort of buy it. I'm not sure exactly how that works, but they'll buy it and keep it aside for investments in the future. So the initial float can't fail. It'll always be that. It's just if you want to buy into it, you can buy into it. Otherwise, Silver Lake holds that as a separate entity over there for New Zealanders to buy into.
Yeah, for further capitalization should they need it and whatnot. I mean, it seems like a really good plan, like a viable commercial plan that'll actually benefit all the parties and future-proofing a lot of things. Yeah. Obviously, things can change and whatnot, and we all know rugby's in a precarious state. But Silver Lake clearly seems to think that it's got legs to grow. I think especially in the United States, and maybe more generally in North America. Obviously, it's this game in South America has grown a lot. And then it's got like Asia and eventually Africa as well to spread into. Like the Southern Hemisphere, Europe, South Africa, to a degree, they're already matured markets, right? There's no more margins. They're already all realized. You don't if you've watched the movie Lord of War, which is about Nicolas Cage and stars Nicolas Cage and Jared Leto, and they play like arms dealers, international illegal arms dealers.
All right, yeah.
One of the things he opens up with is he realizes selling guns is lucrative because there's always a need for violence, and his brother's like, "Do we open a gun store?" He's like, "Look, they're already more common than McDonald's in this country. Like, why would we do that? We have to get guns to places where there's no guns." Now,
Yeah.
obviously, I don't condone that philosophy, but the idea is like you grow rugby where there isn't already rugby, or like there's not as much rugby, and there's more opportunity. Like the low-hanging fruit is
Yeah,
there
yeah.
to improve. Like you get every success story, like a Georgia, a Japan, a Argentina, and Italy. They're good for the game. That makes everybody more well off.
Yeah.
Like the so I there's like I I do think that with the deal, especially if eventually Silver Lake comes up with a similar sort of agreement with Australia,
Mm.
and then maybe however the new structure of Sanzar goes on, because the future is weird. We don't know
Yeah.
if we're gonna continue. Like it's been put on the table to have that trans hemisphere competition again. I don't see that happening. 2025, South Africa have committed to the Rugby Championships, but said nothing about it after. Sanzar
Yeah.
have offered to move the Rugby Championships to coincide with the Northern Hemisphere season, and I wonder about that. Like now that cricket and rugby play roughly all the time, like cricket plays all the time, I don't think as a cricket fan I'd be too worried about rugby season being at the same time as cricket season.
No.
But the other side of that is, what is the future of rugby in New Zealand if it's essentially a summer game as opposed to a winter game? And like also, or are we going to be in a situation where we play our club competition in winter, but do something else in summer? It's going to be interesting, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
Once we know, but if it's on at the same time, it means Argentina and South Africa's players can play in the rugby championship without having to worry about their clubs saying no. And these windows and things can be these windows can be protected for everybody, hopefully. Now, even with all that, South Africa might still not want to continue with the rugby championship. The flip side of that is the clubs all over Europe, not just England, absolutely oppose the expansion of the Six Nations.
Yeah.
And that is something I know for a fact. I don't know whether they kick Italy out and take South Africa in. I mean, is there a precedent for that? If you're not expanding it, like also where does Argentina go in that situation? So I think in the end, Sanzar will shift it for Argentina's sake, and I think that would be a good outcome, because then we can basically combine that international window for New Zealand, for the southern and northern hemisphere, and also maybe would allow Japan to join into the rugby championships as well.
Yeah.
So it becomes more of the southern hemisphere becomes more of a Pacific competition, and the northern hemisphere more of an Atlantic competition. So you have an Atlantic conference and a Pacific conference,
which would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and the idea here, going forward, it could, it would still be interesting, but there's still issues, right? If South Africa don't like, New Zealand and Australia are not kicking South Africa out of the rugby championships. That's just not going to happen.
No.
But if the Springboks only decide to play in the Northern Hemisphere, and let's assume they expand it to 7 teams for now, as for argument's sake, does that mean what happens when hypothetically South Africa wins 5 in a row, Grand Slam wise? Because with all due respect, South Africa has gonna be the most populous of those countries eventually. Like at the moment, it has, I think, 60 million people, which is the population of the entire UK.
Yeah.
And then you are probably going to, I believe South Africa is gonna get into the 100 million people mark in 2030, 2040.
All right, yeah.
But don't quote me on that. Like, may not be 2030 because that's only 8 years away. they're not getting 40 million in 8 years, but maybe 2050.
Yeah.
Sort of thing, just from immigration from the rest of Africa and things like that. So obviously huge numbers of eyeballs and also commercial opportunities in Africa, which is what the continent that's going to experience a lot of population growth this century, and we assuming demographic models hold, and the South African market could easily dominate. Like South Africa already has a better rugby culture than any of the Northern Hemisphere countries. I'm sorry. In terms of sport and producing talent and getting they were better than those countries when they only picked from 2% of their population. Now they're able to pick from 100% of their population. And I still feel like in England and to a degree France, it's still a rara boys sport. People are all from public schools. Yeah. I'm sure South Africa was a bit like that, but it's expanded a lot more in the townships, and a bit unlike obviously South African rugby has had its own controversies with race relations, but nowhere near the level of cricket. For a while, the cricket community in South Africa were literally going about, oh, but what about rugby? How come we get the criticism all the time, but rugby doesn't? And then, they're like, look, we have an actual black captain who won the World Cup, and a team, most of the teams have players, and the systems are in place for people in the townships to go and play and earn opportunities to play rugby. And whereas cricket is not in South Africa, from what I understand, is basically the private school network that produces all the talent. And that's also to a large extent I think the situation in Zimbabwe, some to a certain, whereas it's not like that in Australia or New Zealand. There's very few countries have the relationship with cricket that Australia does. As much as I agree that cricket is a religion in India, there was never a time when the captain of the Indian cricket team was the most powerful person in the country. Which, that's what people used to say about the Australian captain of the cricket team.
Yeah.
That's a completely different, not saying one is more better or less than the other, it's just a different relationship.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas, in rugby, you could arguably say the same thing about the captain of the All Blacks.
Yeah.
In fact, that would be true for New Zealand. I don't know if that was ever actually true for Australia, but it would actually be true in New Zealand.
Yes, no, it would definitely be true. Well, depend a little bit exactly what had happened at the previous World Cup, but yeah.
Yeah.
Any New Zealand rugby captain that had won a World Cup, I think they're instantly people would just accept everything they say, especially if their name's Richie McCaw and having won two on them.
Yeah. But look, we just accept what Richie McCaw says because we know he's really good at understanding rules. That's not necessarily because of the captaincy thing, right?
No. Well, that was why he became captain.
Come on, understanding rules. South Africa and Australia fans. Just leave it out there for you.
He was the best.
He totally didn't cheat at all. Ever.
He never cheated. He always.
And the refs were never biased.
No. I mean, they all knew that he knew exactly what was happening.
As a related note, I do have a colleague who's South African, who's pretty much grew up in New Zealand, moved here when he was 8, but he's obviously a hardcore Springbok fan. And I asked him, are the All Blacks your second team? He said, I couldn't bear to have the All Blacks as my second team till Richie McCaw retired. And I'm like, that's a completely acceptable and understandable situation to be in.
It really is.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this is a good deal for New Zealand rugby. I couldn't bear to have the All Blacks as my second team till Richie McCaw retired. And I'm like, that's a completely acceptable and understandable situation to be in.
It really is.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this is a good deal for New Zealand rugby till Richie McCaw retired. And I'm like, that's a completely acceptable and understandable situation to be in.
It is. It really is.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so this is a good deal for New Zealand rugby. So this is the immediate problems. Like they've sorted the money situation out. The second issue is obviously Super Rugby,
Mm.
and what's going on. Like we've already had some games that are being postponed due to, I believe, COVID reasons.
Yeah. It's the same reasons that um, sort of played like the EPL earlier in the season,
Yeah,
with just players having
and
COVID and not being able to play, not being able to.
everyone is playing each other at least is playing each other once. Is that right? Or is every
I
or
think whilst the border restrictions are in, the two conferences are playing each other twice.
right?
I think, but
So
they
at
are
the
hoping
moment
to have a crossover at some
is
point.
and explain it to me. Obviously, we have the five traditional Australian franchises: the Brumbies, Reds, Waratahs, Force, and Rebels.
Yep.
And we have the five New Zealand franchises: the Blues, the Chiefs, the Hurricanes, the Crusaders, and the Highlanders. And you
Yep.
have two teams from the Pacific: the
Yep.
Fijian Drua and the Moana Pacific.
Yep.
I know Moana Pacific are basically based in New Zealand. They're in the New Zealand Conference. Would that
Yes,
be correct?
they're in the New Zealand conference. Yes, and they're based
And
in
Fiji and the
out of
Fiji one is in the Australian Conference. Is that
yeah,
right?
yeah, that's right. And so yeah, Moana Pacifica is based out of South Auckland. I think they're playing at Mount Smart, um, and that's their
Good
home
choice.
base, which is a great choice. I think originally they were looking to based out of Samoa and Tonga and have joint home games. Like,
I think
um,
that's not viable for at least now because
no,
Samoa and Tonga are still being very careful,
yeah,
rightfully, about COVID
yeah, yeah.
and
I mean
the
that was
situation in the
the
country.
original theory. That's where what they wanted to do, but yes, with COVID and those things, so they've made the very smart decision that actually South Auckland's the best place for them, and so that's where they're basing themselves out of for the foreseeable future.
Drua are based in Sydney, or are they also based in Auckland?
The Drua are based up in Suva,
In
so they're based out
Suva.
of
Okay.
Fiji. So they're playing, and I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure they're playing matches there.
Okay. That's excellent for them because they'll
Because
have their home fans.
yeah. So they've got a yeah. Not don't quote me on that, because I'm not 100% on the Australian
And
side of things. So I may be
yeah,
wrong,
and
but
the Drua have won a game, and to nobody's surprise, it was against the Rebels because, as I said, they're not very good.
yeah,
Um,
exactly, exactly.
they um, so at the moment, because it's a weird table, we have teams that have played as few as two games with the Moana Pacific, and we have teams that have
Yeah.
got to the full five. Um, the Brumbies lead the table, and they've
I think
basically played everybody in their conference at least once.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's
Um,
useful to point out that all these games at the moment are just in their own conference. So there
yeah,
hasn't been any cross bit yet. So it also changes the dynamics a bit when the Brumbies are only beating the other Australian teams and haven't played the Crusaders or the Blues or the Hurricanes or
yeah.
anyone yet. So
Well, we will find out how good the Brumbies actually are when they actually get to face, because they get to play the Force this weekend, and the Reds next weekend, and then the Drua the weekend after that. Then that and it looks like after they get a bye week, and they will play the Highlanders on the 24th of April.
yeah, so I think
So
that weekend after Easter, the 22nd to the 24th is when they've scheduled. Well, that's when the um, borders all back open so that they can start playing across borders again. So yeah, that's when all the cross conference stuff starts.
yeah, I mean they're playing everybody at the end. They play the Blues. Yeah, I can very easily see the Brumbies get something like 10 wins, sweep their conference, and lose to every New Zealand team.
Yeah,
And that just
that's
might be me being an arrogant New Zealand rugby fan, but yeah,
it.
that's what
Traditionally,
history says.
as I say, traditionally that's what happens. Is that the Australians, yeah, the Brumbies or the Waratahs or the Reds, one of them does well, wins everything in their side, and then come over and lose to at least three of the New Zealand sides, more than likely four, and maybe beat whichever side in New Zealand's been bad that year. Um,
Yeah,
and
which will
and
probably be the Blues.
well, I haven't looked this year, but
I know
last
they've got a 2-1 record out of 3 games. It's not
yeah
too bad, and the Crusaders have lost already to your beloved Chiefs.
yeah
Um,
well the Highlanders have lost 4 from 4, so I think that's perhaps where things are going badly in the New Zealand side. Not
the
including the
rugby hipsters
Pacifica.
are all going to be upset.
Yeah, that's not including the Pacifica. Who,
Yeah.
as you said, with
We don't expect the Pacifica to do too well in their first year,
no,
unfortunately, and they're in the tougher division, unfortunately for them.
yeah.
By a
So
long shot, they're in the tougher division.
so that will be interesting for them when they start to play across as well, um, and see how that goes. And
If the Moana Pacifica also beat every Australian team, you've got problems.
yeah, I don't expect that to happen, but yes, they would definitely have problems there. Um, but as you say, potentially the rebels and maybe the force. Though the force, the force are 2 and 3, so that's not too bad. But see where that goes. Um, Interesting will be the Jura versus Moana Pacifica as well, which will be
But the most important date on the calendar is that. So, it looks like the Chiefs. I mean, one loss was against the Blues, so yeah,
yeah.
all is right with the world.
Well,
I've already given up on beating the Crusaders, but making sure we don't lose to the Chiefs is important as a Blues
well,
fan.
yeah,
We have to hold on to things.
we get to have our revenge on the 9th. We'll be down in Hamilton, so maybe
Yeah,
a one
yeah,
and
yeah.
one. It'd be interesting there.
It could well be a 1-1, but I'm not seeing when the Blues are supposed to play the Crusaders. Oh, so that's the match that's been postponed.
Yeah,
Tough. And when were the Crusaders supposed to come up to Auckland?
must be
That match was supposed to be in Crusaders country.
yeah.
I'm sure Christchurch because it's the Blues. Um, you know, with all due respect to the other parts of Crusader country, they're not going to play that game in Nelson or Blenheim.
It does. Yeah, it doesn't look like there is a second one for that. So I'm not 100 sure how they've
Yeah,
um, done because the Blues Highlanders play twice in 3 weeks. So they played before the postponement and they're playing after the postponement. And then Moana Pacifica and Blues play a week on the 20 in a couple of weeks and then play again the week after that. So I'm sure there's some rhyme to this to these games, but I would suspect that a little bit that is having to fill in games because of the
yeah,
borders and trying to shuffle something
yeah.
together so it's something resembling a
A
competition.
competition.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see how it plays out. At this stage, I think it's supposed to be 2 teams from each conference that play a semi-final and final. Would that be right?
That's my understanding of it.
Looks
So
very
yeah,
likely to be a Reds and Brumbies from the Australian side, and
yeah,
either the Crusaders and the Crusaders are probably going to be one of them, and it looks like the Chiefs at the second one, but the Blues and the Hurricanes are only a game behind with the game, because they haven't played that game.
yeah.
Mind you, one of those games for the Blues is the Crusaders, and they've already lost to the Hurricanes, so yeah, it's always competitive in the New Zealand division.
Yeah,
It's just the way it is.
exactly. It's always a bit hard there trying to
It might come down to point differentials, unfortunately for the Moana Pacifica and the Highlanders.
I see there is an extra knockout round, so it's the qualifiers then the semi-final. The qualifiers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it looks like there's a quarterfinal round. So there may be 4 and 4, so that may make it a little bit easier. And then from there it goes to
If it's 4 and 4, then I think we know the New Zealand teams, right? At this point,
yeah.
Like they're there, and they're going to play Australian opposition in the next round. Like, is that even fair?
Well, they get to go play them round anyway, so yeah. It comes down to the point of for the top 4 New Zealand teams not losing to any silly things out of or any games they really shouldn't. Maybe the Brumbies and the Waratahs, maybe, or the Reds. Like, probably the Reds more than the Waratahs at the moment, but as always, get your points on the board.
Get your points on the board. Hope you don't face a New Zealand team in the knockouts. That's just going to be... Heck, the Highlanders might even make it if they manage to get a few wins, but maybe not enough. It'll be interesting.
Yeah.
So this is the thing. What is the future with the Super Rugby, though? Because Argentina at the moment have their amateur competition.
Right.
Unfortunately, the Jaguars are...
Sorry, just take back a step. It is going to be a straight table. There's no Australia, New Zealand, so it's top 8. Go through to the quarters.
That's what I figured from the...
Yeah. Sorry, thought I'd clarify that. And everybody... Teams play 8 teams once and 3 teams twice, with a focus on the 3 teams twice as a focus on derby matches. Apparently, Blues Crusaders didn't count as a.
All right, so the biggest rivalry in Super Rugby doesn't count. Fair enough. They're not. That's not a derby.
No.
Why do they do such dumb stuff? I don't get it.
Because they're not next to each other, so that doesn't count for some reason. Despite the fact that you say the biggest rivalry over the course of all of New Zealand rugby history.
Yeah, back in the day, maybe the Bulls-Sharks rivalry was bigger, but no, like the Blues-Crusaders rivalry is the biggest rivalry in Super Rugby.
Yeah,
and then followed by the Chiefs-Blues rivalry.
Yeah, I would go Auckland-Canterbury in any form. New Zealand rugby is the biggest rugby rivalry there is.
Sure, the Blues and the Crusaders are not Canterbury and Auckland anymore, but it's the same thing.
It's basically the same thing.
And for whatever reason, the Chiefs don't have that same antipathy with Canterbury that Auckland does. Like the Chiefs and Hurricanes, that's a derby, and the Chiefs and Blues, that's a derby. Fair.
Yeah.
Completely fair. Figure something out for their third match.
Yeah.
Highlanders, Crusaders, is that a derby? Fine. I mean, I don't think the Crusaders fans think that.
Hurricanes fans would, though.
Sorry, Crusaders, every New Zealand team thinks Crusaders are their rivals, but we all know their one true rival is us, the Blues.
Yes.
And
and the Hurricanes.
You guys are all their side rivals, okay? We're their real rival. We're the wife.
And I'd put the Highlanders, or at least Otago, as being pretty close to that from a Crusaders fan's point, because it's the other South Island one. So perhaps that's more big brother, little brother sort of situation where they're your rival. As a big brother,
Highlanders
your rivals,
fans,
but
I'm sure Highlanders fans will take it as their local rival. But like also the Highlanders and the Blues play for the Gordon Trophy. What's his name? The late, who was the coach for both of those teams. So there is a rivalry there because there's a trophy that's played between the two teams.
Yeah.
And so basically the Blues, the rivals, realistically are the Highlanders, the Crusaders, and the Chiefs.
Yeah.
Like, that's it. Like, for the Hurricanes, sure, you could go Chiefs, you can go Blue. If they pick Blues, I'm like, really? Really?
No,
Wellington and Auckland have a rivalry, but it's not the same as the Hurricanes and the Blues having a rivalry?
Yeah, so the Blues got the doubles, got Highlanders, Moana Pacific, and the Chiefs. Um, so yeah,
Oh, yeah. Oh, fair enough. If they wanted, obviously Moana Pacifica have to find local rivals,
yeah.
and that's fair. I think fair for them to have the Blues in that.
Especially since they're basing themselves out of South Auckland, like that's
Yeah,
you've
yeah.
got
But Moana Pacifica to have for them to have both the Blues and the Chiefs as rivals absolutely makes sense, and also probably Wellington. Like that would mean to me the logical rivals for them.
yeah.
The
They got Chiefs, Blues, and Hurricanes. So yeah, so Wellington. So
that makes sense. That's
makes sense.
100% makes sense. If this is a thing that's in here because they had to fit in Moana Pacifica, yeah, fair. And also, like, I think you have to keep that thing going with the Highlanders. That's fine. It's
Yeah,
just dumb. Like, it's a dumb. I understand that it's just a compromise, but it's the dumbest compromise because the fact that Auckland is supposedly not the rival of the Crusaders or a derby match, that's like the dumbest thing ever. That's the North Island South Island derby match.
especially since the Crusaders got Chiefs twice. Like, I'm not a problem to me. I like that's fine, but yeah, even I as a Chiefs fan would go, well, if you're gonna have somebody up this way, that's the the rival, such for the Crusaders it should have been the Blues. But I guess a little bit of the fixtures and working out. It wasn't that
The
it was.
Crusaders did lose back-to-back finals to the Chiefs, so yeah.
I mean there is that there.
We're only 1-1 with the Crusaders, right? They beat us up here in Auckland, and we went down once, and then we won again in 2003 with Oreni Ai and Carlos Spencer.
Yeah.
Shout out to Carlos Spencer.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
But yeah, to give the competition, the Super Rugby competition, fair dues. Like, it's not that they're saying these are all only rival matches. They're just, that was their focus. If we're gonna do one, we're gonna do that. It's just it seems a bit weird that Crusaders Blues wasn't one of them. But
yeah,
I guess you've got to balance out competition needs and scheduling needs and all this other stuff into it as well.
yeah.
And I guess you're also maybe hoping that the two of them get to a semi-final, even a final berth, and so you maybe don't want to overload it by having 3 games the whole season with them. Like the second game is the knockout game that matters.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll see how that goes. Since the reintroduction of Super Rugby, the Crusader, since Super Rugby Aotearoa, and then like the iterations that happened since then, it's always the Crusaders have won every competition, haven't they?
The Crusaders just won every competition, full stop. But
yeah.
Yeah, I
Because
think
before COVID, wasn't the last one won by the Highlanders, I want to say? Like, I know the Crusaders are the winningest team in Super Rugby history. That's a given. They've won 10 titles.
2019 was the Crusaders. No, it was still Crusaders. Hurricanes was 2016. Highlanders the year before that. Then
that's
the Warriors,
right.
Chiefs. So yeah, the 3 before COVID were all Crusaders.
3 in a row for the Crusaders,
but they hadn't won before
Jaguars had made the finals, so that's it's a pity that they couldn't be kept. But I think that is the long-term plan for Sanzar. I'm sure to have Argentina meaningfully rejoin the Southern Hemisphere rugby fold.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, South Africa's the ship may have sold, but maybe eventually the Sunwolves and the Jaguars come back.
Yeah, it'd be good to have them both back. So, I'm hopeful for more expansion around the Pacific. Maybe a Canadian or American team in as well.
Yeah. So it's interesting that the South African version of Super Rugby, which was played in 2020, called Super Rugby Unlocked, had a team called the Pumas. I'm like, why? There are so many freaking big cats in Africa. A
Yeah.
puma is not one of them.
Yes.
And in fact, like that is the name of like one other rugby team in
Yes.
the world. That's not you guys.
It
Why
is
would you
funny,
do
actually.
this?
There is, yeah, that's an interesting question to be had. Like, for all you say, you could choose a big cat from Africa, but you chose one that's not, and is also the name of a rugby team, which is not you. So,
Yeah. And it's like, hey, it's not found in your country or continent, and it's not part of like any heraldry that belongs in your country.
yeah.
Like, there's absolutely nothing wrong with like. There's so many cat names in the leagues already. Like we have a long history of cat names from South Africa in general. So none of it would have been like you could be panthers, you could be leopards. There's already a lions. There's been a cats. There's been a cheetahs. I get you can't do them,
Yeah.
but like everybody else is like, there's so many other big cats. They're just all there.
Oh, well.
Also, there's also cats you could have picked that aren't already related to Argentina, the rugby team. You could
Exactly.
have, if you really had to, you could have been tigers. There's no other tigers, and
Exactly.
there's no rugby team called the Tigers. If you really wanted a big cat, that's so weird. But the
To be fair, well, slightly fair to them, apparently they were founded in 1969. So, it
okay,
is a name that's been around a while.
yes,
Still
but not as
question about,
long as the Argentinian rugby team
no,
that like.
still question about why, but
Right.
at least,
There's already weirdness about the fact that the Argentinians have a jaguar on their badge and they're called the Pumas. Like that.
yeah,
But, historical accidents, that happens. Like,
yeah,
And there's a reason, like, as somebody who works under pressure in media, like, stuff, we know, like, the idea that a reporter just couldn't remember, couldn't figure out what cat that was and knew both and just picked one.
yeah,
Like, okay. They didn't know it was gonna stick. Like, that wasn't like he wasn't in an official naming ceremony and they said, this is your one job. And he's like, okay, oh, I screwed up. Like, that wasn't the situation he was in.
no. I
Um,
mean, at, to be fair with the All Blacks, I mean, that's a
the
tradition now, almost
historical
of historical tradition of mistakenly naming a national side something wrong.
or
You know?
typos or mistakes ending up being the name of national sides are a thing in rugby. That's fine.
Yeah.
If it's good enough for the All Blacks, it's good enough for the Pumas,
Yeah,
Los
exactly.
Pumas. But yeah, and they didn't want to change it to Jaguars because they like embraced the name.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm sure like that was like 1910, I believe, that the Los Pumas played their first test against England. So
Yeah. Something
they've
like
had
that.
it for more than 50 years before this team from South Africa. But yeah, I'm not. It's fine for a club, but if you're gonna play in a transnational competition where the other, like, it's like if a New Zealand team had like one of the teams were called the Wallabies, like
Yeah.
it would be weird.
It'd be
There are
very weird.
wallabies, though less weird because there are wallabies in New Zealand.
Yeah.
They exist here in the wild, not just in the zoos. Like,
Yeah, sure, introduced from Australia, but yes, they do just exist. So
I- they're an, they're an, they're an introduced animal, but they exist in the wild. They're there.
yeah.
Um, but okay. That was the go, but does this is because I don't think Argentina want to have more than one team at the moment. Would that
Hmm.
be the next Argentina one, and maybe another team go for Japan again, or maybe a more Asian thing, maybe base it in Hong Kong, or well, maybe not Hong Kong, but
Yeah, maybe. I think Japan's probably the most likely place.
I
The other
think
one,
Japan is the most likely place as well.
the other one would be either, I think we've talked about it before, maybe a Honolulu-based Super Rugby
American,
with American
basically
one.
representing America. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
I would be down for that as well.
yeah,
Um, I don't know if that's what USA Rugby would want because the home of USA Rugby seems to be Los Angeles and Chicago.
yeah,
They play a lot of their games at Soldier Field, which yeah, my cousin's gone to see them because
yeah,
they got free tickets. So it'll be interesting to see how they do because at the end of the day, I can't help but feel Australian teams are less competitive in this competition now purely because the talent pool is heavily diluted for Australia.
yeah,
Like, I know in reality you should get rid of the Rebels because they have no local support and the team is not very good. But, you know, financially it makes more sense to get rid of the Force. It's an extremely. This is what was going to happen when you did this, you know?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
when they had three teams, Australia were strong and they were like regularly winning Super Rugby, or the Brumbies were. So maybe this is a good. To be fair, with after introducing the Rebels and the Force, the Queensland Reds and the Waratahs managed to win Super Rugby, right? So
yeah.
and the Waratahs won Super Rugby in the same year that the Blues won State of Origin after a very, very long time.
Ah, yes, yes,
So there is that. And like I to be fair, if you introduce this concept of derby games to be like cross-national rivalry too, the Blues would have both the Waratahs and the Crusaders as their rivals, and the
yeah,
Chiefs. Those would be the three rivals
yeah, yeah,
for the Blues.
definitely.
Because as much that's our sister city across the Tasman. Like they are. Like it
Yeah,
doesn't
no, that's yeah.
matter what the official thing is, but that is what that is what it is. Um,
At the very least, I look at it and go, well, it's
the shared
the
history of the two cities is like inescapable. Like people
yeah,
who have families and from the very founding of both cities, like from the very founding of the European settlement of both cities, I should say.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, agreed.
Um, the like part of the reason we have a flag is because people in Sydney Harbour needed to know you know which ships were coming from New Zealand, and like that's why like it's been around for almost 50 years before the Australians got their flag.
Yeah,
Yeah. But that being said, the rugby competition, it seems, there are things to be worked out, and we both hope that the world game will catch up with, decide to get off its ass and actually do the things needed to fix everything.
yeah,
And to basically make rugby, like, realistically, rugby's in the position where it could be the second most popular game. Something the NBA is like, but maybe not catch up to the basketball, but very close, like very close to being third.
yeah, yeah. I know what you mean.
Because you need a lot, like the amount of facilities needed to be high level basketball player, like having indoor courts and all these other things, versus like you just need a field to play rugby.
Yeah, exactly.
It's you know, this it's no coincidence that the three those the two of the most popular games in the world are two games that are really easy to play and set up.
Yeah,
And rugby
it's
is
true.
not that far behind.
No, it is. Yeah, I mean to play rugby is fairly easily. I think the only real restriction is more the technical restriction
Yeah.
that you can hurt yourself quite badly in rugby
Yeah,
if you
maybe
don't have
rugby
that.
sevens is an easier game to pick up that way.
Yeah, yeah, I think so.
Moving on from the Union code to the newer code, Rugby League the NRL season has started, and the
Yeah.
Warriors, even though they're definitely 100% making the playoffs and winning it all this year, have come on to a poor start.
Very poor start. You say. I think it's almost time to start pulling out the line. They're a mathematical chance of making the finals.
Not yet, not yet, not yet.
No, it's only 2 games in, so
That's 3 games in, I think. Are they? No, they're two
no,
games
two.
in. You're right.
Yeah.
They did lose. The Warriors did lose to two very good teams, I think. The Dragons, I think, are going to be quite good this season,
Yeah.
and and they lost to the Titans. That was a very close game. I think that game was winnable. Like, I don't know, the Titans, I'm iffy on. Like, they're usually competing with us for being a mid-table or a wooden spoon team
Yeah.
in most seasons, but I think um, the Warriors will will for the will at the losing that game to the Titans is like, ah, come on, those are points dropped. That was that was a game they needed to try and win to start building a momentum. And it doesn't get much easier for them. They're playing the West Tigers. While I don't think the West Tigers are going to be that strong this season, they're still going to probably at home. They're not going to have too many problems against the Warriors, unfortunately. I don't think.
I don't think
But
so
we do
either.
get to play but we do get, and then we get to play the Broncos. But the thing is, this is supposedly a home game. It's going to be played at Redfern because I think the Warriors are still based out of Queensland.
Yeah, and
So it's going to be like
likely.
a home game for the Broncos.
Yeah, I think the Warriors are there. Maybe July they might be back. I think was the plan, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I want them to try and get as many wins as possible uh before they're able to come home.
Yeah.
But it's a hard ask. I could almost see them go without doing it without any wins till they're able to move back to Fortress Smart.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. It's a Warriors Broncos game. I expect them to be fully up for it, but
Yeah. Exactly.
unfortunately not do too well. But that being said, we're clearly gonna do much better next season as defending champions and start better.
Yes, of course.
And that's my line. They're building a really good team at the Warriors. I think
Yeah.
being able to play in front of home fans is definitely going to be an up. These boys have had shared adversity together. Um, Ron Johnson's back. All is right with the world, right? Like that's um I'm sure Roger Tuivasa-Sheck will get sick of rugby and he'll come back to the true faith.
I think so. Yeah. He'll have a. I think it might be a couple of seasons with the Blues for RTS, but I would say
Yeah.
at some point he'll be back, and that would be good. Um, so yeah, we're definitely. I think you're right. Whilst it's another one of the mantras that the Warriors are building a good team, it's it is hard not to think that every year because they do get some really good players and they have really good really good team that play well together. It's just
Yeah.
I don't know, sometimes like the first game against the Dragons just was full of a little bit of silliness
Mm,
and Warriors that I
yeah,
had
yeah.
game style I hadn't seen since probably the early 2000s with the random offloads and everything, which really played against them. So they just lost possession.
Yeah.
But the Titans one there that seemed a bit sore because they really did seem like they should have won it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's thanks. But I
But
see once again we get some rather disruptive news anyway, because it looks like Reece Walsh is being courted by the Broncos as well to go back next year. So
I
that's the
hope not. I hope that doesn't happen, obviously. But yeah, like I always, my dream is always that one day, um, Ivan Cleary will go, yeah, it's too easy winning at Penrith. Like, is it even a challenge? I'll just come on, boy, let's go back to Auckland.
we
And
liked it better in
actually
Auckland
prove.
anyway.
Hmm?
We liked it better in Auckland anyway.
Like, man, as much as like to be fair though, Penrith do treat him properly. I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah,
gonna say
they do.
they don't love him as much as we did. They do. Like that would be unfair. But you know, if Ivan Cleary wants to be considered the GOAT of coaching ever, if he wins the Premiership for Auckland, nobody will argue.
No.
Like if he leads the Auckland Warriors to a Premiership, he will be the GOAT of GOAT in terms of coaches.
Yeah. Fair, I think that almost counts for anybody. Whoever can actually lead the Warriors to an NFL victory and a championship, I think deserves that title.
Yeah.
But it's
Like.
yeah. It's just overcoming whatever the voodoo is that's on the Warriors. But yeah, I mean, as you say, they've got a good team. It's just sorting it out, which will happen.
Like, and now that Russians aren't allowed to invest in the Premiership anymore, maybe they'll get into Rugby League and we'll suddenly be able to afford. Like, there's a salary cap, so we can't like be silly and splurge money on players' salaries. But you know,
Yeah.
maybe if we give like Wayne Bennett like a 50 million a year contract, he can be convinced to move
I'm sure
to
it would.
Auckland.
Well, sure, it wouldn't take too much to convince him.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. He just, yeah, likes it where he is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like the with Deshaun Watson who moved to the Cleveland Browns. At first they were like, I don't want to go there. It's really, really cold. It's so cold. And then they're like, you know that $250 million contract you have? Yep. We'll guarantee all that money. Okay, I'm gonna move to Cleveland. You have a really good team, and I think we should.
It's amazing how much warmth,
I'll
a whole
just,
lot of money can buy you.
Yep, pretty much.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Convince Craig Bellamy. That's who we want, right? Craig
Yeah,
Bellamy if Ivan Cleary doesn't want to come.
yeah. I will take him. He'll be fine. That
But
probably is one of the things that is missing from the Warriors is having an actual world class coach come coach us at the moment. Yeah, and maybe we'll get there eventually. And so it did have
maybe
Claire, and no
we
surprise
did
that
have
when we
Cleary, and he did take us to the grand final, and it was amazing. But he didn't stay,
yeah, no.
unfortunately.
Yeah, as I say, no surprise when we had a world class coach that the Warriors actually did well.
Yeah,
I think myself along
I
with
think
most.
Daniel Anderson was also a good coach, and obviously he led
Yeah,
us to a grand final as well. And
yeah,
then
yeah,
like another three good seasons, three
yeah,
very good seasons, I think, with under Daniel Anderson.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I
Um,
think that's you're right. That's probably the something that's needed is maybe throw some money at a decent coach and try and lure one of the top ones over and see whether that can spark something out at the Warriors. As you say, and at the very least, tempting them with the take the Warriors to a grand final, win a grand final with the Warriors, cement your spot as the GOAT. It's definitely something
yeah,
to be able to put into that argument of, well, I took the Warriors to a grand final. Did anybody else do that? No. Okay. I guess that settles that argument. GOAT is me.
yeah, pretty much. And Nathan Cleary would be like a Warriors legend forever.
Yeah. Like you said before, it was almost that way anyway.
Yeah,
Or could have been.
he had,
In an
yeah,
alternative universe, that is true.
yeah, absolutely. But it was not to be.
Not to be.
Now,
I don't think we
with
can
that
blame.
being said, we have a long season to go, and I am looking forward to it. I'm really slowly getting into the rugby league season, even though the Warriors aren't doing too well. I do think Penrith are gonna end up being like, if I'm being serious and not facetious, if I had to pick a team that other than the Warriors to win it all, it's be the Panthers.
Yeah.
Obviously,
I,
because I think Jordan Ivan Cleary is the goat.
well, he pretty much is. But I mean, they've got a good team. I mean, they beat the
Yeah,
Dragons. They beat the Sea Eagles. They smashed the Sea Eagles, actually. They smashed Manly. 28-6 first matchup.
yeah,
That's a way to start your season.
pretty much.
But yeah, I mean, you say it's only early days, so it could be interesting, but almost the main contenders are sitting at the top. I mean, it's Knights first, which I wouldn't call a main contender, but
Yeah.
still tend to have good teams. But you got Panthers, Broncos, Storm. So all undefeated so far through the first two matches.
Yeah.
That's going to potentially be something that continues through. We'll see. I mean, they're all three really good teams. Surprisingly enough, well, not that surprising, but a little bit surprising. Sea Eagles sitting currently at the bottom with 0-2 record.
Yeah.
Actually, have done worse than the Warriors. Look at that. Them and the West.
Yeah. So there's definitely points on offer for the Warriors to get there. So
Yeah.
I will be cautiously optimistic, and then we're obviously gonna get all the way to the playoffs after we're able to play at home.
Yes, exactly. Obviously.
Now we move on to the third oval ball code, and arguably the biggest code. I don't think arguably even it is the biggest code. When you consider viewing numbers across Australasia.
Yeah.
The AFL season has just started, and nothing says the AFL season has just started than the Essendon Bombers losing badly in their first game of the season. Essendon have not won a premiership since the year 2000. Ironically, also one of the last times I've ever seen a live Essendon game in Australia, which was that year.
Right.
Seems to happen every year I manage to watch a live Essendon game in Australia. They win the premiership that year.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh.
Essendon, come on. Yeah, maybe you want to. And by live, I mean on TV, not at the stadium. Like, I didn't get to go to the MCG.
Well, maybe if
Um,
they get you over there to actually watch one live, they may actually,
I may.
go all the way, win everything, be wonderful. Get 2 years out of it.
Yeah, well, they're currently bottom of the season, losing to Geelong. Look, both me and my cousin now there are uh, Essendon fans. He's a bigger fan than I am, and he was just like, yeah, losing, nothing feels worse than losing to Geelong. Even at least losing to the other Melbourne clubs, you're like, okay, that's fair. But we'll actually see how. It's only one game, obviously. We'll actually see how good they are when they play the champion Brisbane Lions next week. This week, rather.
Yeah,
Can you?
that could get interesting.
Yeah. So it's gonna be a long season. We shall see what happens. And now the game is it's gonna be all the games on Saturday, and then we'll know more. But at this point, I think that's all we have time for today. Thanks very much for listening. I hope to see you all next time.
Catch you next time.